Immigration policy changes every day. Careers, businesses, and families are all at risk. You need to stay informed. We can help. Welcome to this week's episode of the Immigration Podcast.
I am not Donald Trump, and I do not approve of the Immigration Podcast.
All right. Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of the Immigration Podcast. My name is Rob Ratliff. I'm an immigration attorney with the firm Brennan Mann and Diamond in Cleveland, Ohio. And with me today is one of my partners, Michael Sneeringer. Michael, say hello.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
No, I'm very glad. Glad you could come on. Michael, I don't know if you've seen a lot about immigration in the news lately, but we are seeing an awful lot of clients that are getting detained, oftentimes without any warning, showing up at court and getting dragged out in handcuffs. And from an immigration perspective, many of our clients are entrepreneurs. They have businesses. Many of them have been here decades. So they have families, they have kids, they have houses, they have bank accounts, they have retirement accounts, they have all kinds of things. And when you get detained at a blink of an eye and are facing deportation, oftentimes to a country you may never have been to since you've been an adult, that creates a lot of problems. And what I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you deal with a lot of estates and trusts and financial planning, and try to figure out where clients can go to get some information in these really panicky times and how to be prepared for that. So I think, if you want to give us a little introduction about, what kind of work you do and background on that, and then we'll just kind of talk about stuff.
Certainly. So I've been an estate planner my whole adult career. And what I mean by that is I went from undergrad to law school to an estate planning law firm. And during my time at my first law firm, I got an LLM in estate planning, which for the layperson is like having a master's, but as a lawyer. And in the estate planning realm, I've done all sorts of things, from litigation to things involving tax disputes to property disputes with county property appraisers to just the mundane of drafting wills, trusts, healthcare documents, durable powers of attorney for finances, and corporate documents. I'd say today predominantly my practice integrates asset protection planning with estate planning, which I think will be valuable news to your listeners.
Yeah, I think so as well. And, the history of the United States is that immigrants come here and they're primarily entrepreneurs, small business from landscaping and drywalling all the way to owning mega corporations. These clients all get involved in that. And because of the way the work authorization works in the United States, sometimes that's the only way to make money. So in a situation, let's start just kind of from the beginning. In a situation where somebody maybe doesn't have a social security number, maybe has worked their whole career and owns their businesses with a ITIN number, does that create any specific issues for them trying to get their funds out of the country?
So in just creating a business that way, if that client came to me, then what I would state to them is you need a basic estate plan and we need to battle test it in the event that something happens and you can no longer be in the country. So with that specific client, we're going to attack the planning, Rob, differently than we would just your everyday average Joe that was born here. In that, as soon as that client says business, my ears perk up to think, okay, we need to deal with the business first. We can worry about a will and health stuff later, integrating them quickly into the plan as well. But the first thing I would want to see is some governing documents. So more than just your certificate of filing or articles of incorporation, I would want this client to have good corporate governance docs that states who's in charge if that individual who started or owns the business leaves the country, is incapacitated, is jailed for a certain amount of time. We would just want to specify all the factors of when a successor person could operate or deal with the company. And in conjunction with those governing documents, Rob, I would want that client to execute what's called a durable power of attorney for finances. In Ohio, there's a statutory form. In Florida and Wisconsin, where I'm also licensed to practice, you have different forms, but for the most part, they're very similar in that a person is nominated and that person, effective immediately or effective upon incapacity, or in this particular scenario, effective upon being taken out of the country or jailed, somebody else takes over and can act in the financial best interests of the client from a fiduciary standpoint. So I would tell that client in our hypothetical scenario, hey, immediately you got to do these documents, like as soon as you can. And what would it take? Well, for corporate documents, oftentimes those can just be signed. In fact, they can be docu-signed. So if a person has access to a computer or a phone, they could push a button and they're signed. An attorney of fact or a durable power of attorney, that's typically going to need notarized. But if the client's coming to see us and they're physically there and they're telling us, hey, this has happened, we can quickly put that document together, Rob. So I hope that answers the question and gives a little extra on top.
Yeah, and so I think that's key because so many people have a small business or even sometimes a bigger business, but because of their immigration status, they've tried to do it, they've tried to set it up quietly, if you will, try to stay under the radar. And that sometimes means that maybe they haven't completely set up the business in a completely legal entity type of way.
And what's interesting, Rob, is if that's the case, so first, you can have legal documents that specify a legal relationship without filing the entity. And legally, you're still like a default, like partnership, so to speak. So, under federal law, for tax purposes, an entity would default to a partnership where two or more people are creating a joint venture. So that has tax implications to it. But then from a federal and state law perspective, you can still join together with an individual, have some formation documents that don't get filed with the state, and that would control. So let's make it a complex example easy. Take my brother Andrew and I. If we were working together and it was an unspoken relationship, but we had something down in paper, on paper, then if something bad were to occur, well, those papers we signed with each other would control. I cannot, or my family cannot say, hey, Michael wasn't a part of that if Michael and Andrew signed those documents. And so I guess on the one hand, I think it's a good thing to say, Rob, that in your hypothetical scenario, there is a mechanism where people can put some things together down in writing and it's still legally binding. On the other hand, if you're the crook, I guess, out there listening to this, just note that you can't say, hey, it wasn't a legal entity, it doesn't count. The answer is, well, if you signed something and you had capacity to contract, you've likely entered into a contract. And the federal government will treat that joint venture as a partnership.
Well, and I think that's really important because a lot of people, especially under the current administration, are really, really afraid about doing anything that's going to draw attention to themselves. And what you're saying is even if you don't have everything set up properly now, there's a way to do it, and a way to do it that's not really going to put you at any risk of ICE all of a sudden want to
And
know where you're at.
And Rob, taking that one step further, it's better than just the handshake deal. I was recently speaking, and this is just an example for the audience. I was recently speaking to a Greek attorney because I have some clients with properties in Greece. And the task was, how do we avoid probate if the person passed away? Well, I took that a step further and I says to them, well, in Greece, what happens if, not probate related, but if the client is sued in the US and there's a judgment taken to Greece, can that Greek property be attached or reached? And, the lawyer just kind of laughed at me and said, Michael, your US world is not our Greek world. There's a difference in liability and personal liability and tort liability in our foreign country than you have in your US country. So I say all that to say, Rob, where we may counsel our US clients to form an entity, liability, well, that's not how business is done in the rest of the world. But we still need to educate our clients or our prospective clients that come to us with immigration matters that, hey, your handshake business might not be a business over here. It's better to get something in writing over here for many different reasons.
Yeah. So in that kind of same situation, if that business owner does find himself or herself on the plane and they're going back to their native country, if they have those documents in place, does that help you as their attorney here in the United States either liquidate that business or help them manage it? How does that help them?
Yes. So I talked about earlier how important the business or the documents were just for the company and related to the individual's capacity, like who's going to run the business. Well, as I kind of alluded to, and maybe I should have said, bookmark this here, a will or a properly drafted trust is helpful as well. So let's take a step back. What is a will? A will is a document that deals with property at death. It sets out who administers the property and who the property goes to. Well, a trust is one step further. And I think a trust, Rob, would be very helpful to explain to a lot of these clients that you're speaking about. Because what a trust is it's a lifetime instrument that we can set up to be revocable, meaning changeable, amendable during the person's lifetime. And instead of our will setting out who property goes to, a trust can do that. A trust can say, at death, here's who property goes to. During my lifetime, here's what happens to property. And a trust is interesting because I can actually title assets in the name of my trust. So if I purchased an automobile, if I have a bank account, or even better, if I want to purchase property, I can purchase it in the name of the trust, and that trust can be set up where there's more than one trustee, so two or more. And what a trustee is and does is it's the person who deals with the assets owned by the trust. And it's the person who, for all intents and purposes, can manage those properties and divvy them up if I pass away. But if I'm deported or I move outside the country, that's a person who can deal with the assets in the States. So, to our example, person knows that they might be on a watch list or it's a person in custody, but they're meeting with the lawyer and they have time. So, what might this person do? They would execute a durable financial power of attorney and a revocable trust. And in that durable financial power of attorney, it's going to say, my agent, my attorney in fact, can move assets into my trust. And the trust will say, this individual's in charge of the assets owned by my trust, possibly a pseudo business or a business, possibly real estate, possibly bank accounts. But then the trust is also going to say, if I never return to the United States and I died. Here's where the assets go to if I pass away. So that's the interplay of these documents: durable power of attorney, person during my lifetime who can deal with the assets; will, if I pass away, who the assets go to; revocable trust, who assets go to both during my lifetime and at my death, and who could control the assets owned by the trust during my lifetime and at my death.
I think that's a very important point about acquiring assets in the name of the trust. So someone that maybe it has questionable employment status in the United States, but is here and is present for all of their equipment, vehicles, buildings, whatever, it can be contained in that trust.
Right.
That's really important, I think, for a lot of people. And
Great.
then in those situations, is that how long does it take to get something like that set up? If somebody's detained, sometimes their options are to maybe try to get out of detention, which means going back to wherever they were originally from as quickly as possible to get out of jail, obviously.
So preparing the documents themselves, like, listen, let's say, for example, we're meeting with client on day one and we have a meeting set up day two. Most law firms, especially those the size of Brennan, Manna, and Diamond, have associates, partners, and members. And a partner and a member is like those in charge of the firm, and associates are lower. So, what would happen? In our scenario, Rob, you would meet with the client and get a list of answers to questions: who's in charge, where are the assets, what are the assets, and who the assets go to if we pass away, or if we're living but just unable to deal with the assets because we're detained or what not. You could go back to the office, Rob, with a list of answers, and utilizing our team approach, we could have a group of associates draft the documents, somebody my level reviews them, and then the next day when you go back, you could get the documents executed if you're able to take one person with you. Why? Wills that are executed, two witnesses, and the durable power of attorney and trust. Trust, two witnesses is a best practices. Durable power of attorney notarized. Well, most lawyers in Ohio are notaries. You pass the bar, you get to become a notary. And 99% of lawyers kind of take advantage of that. So we could realistically, within 24 hours, turn that around. Now, that's just preparing the documents. Once the documents are prepared, we really need to know where assets are. So again, the attorney, working hand in hand with the person nominated in the durable power of attorney for finances, the attorney, in fact, can marshal the assets, get them under management of the trust, so that way there's a probate avoidance and a I'm absent and can't deal with the assets. We avoid that as well by appointing the right person. So, yes, we could turn that around in 24 hours' time. A day would be more difficult, but again, we've seen things happen.
Yeah. So in with many clients, what we see is sometimes they have many times they have U.S. citizen relatives, children, or a spouse, or some other family member. So they may have their assets dispersed for ownership reasons because other people in their family may have, uh, legal status in the United States. All that could be combined into a trust, which would then be a legal entity in the United States, correct?
Correct. That is 100% right, Rob. So instead of me naming joint owners because I feel like I have to in order to protect my assets, wrong. I could use my trust and name one or two trusted people as my successor trustee who could deal with the assets. And then the trust says who my assets go to, who benefits from the assets. So I don't have to use my child who's irresponsible but has citizenship in the United States. I can instead name somebody else to deal with that asset. I'm not pigeonholed, it's broadened.
Yeah, and I think that's you're not leaving your child a burden to deal with your assets and your business
Right.
in that situation. That's important. That brings up another point, though, because many clients, they've been here for a long time. They have kids, and the kids are of varying ages. Sometimes we see very little kids, and then oftentimes much older kids. But if you are leaving your U.S. citizen kid behind because you feel that this United States is the best place for them to continue their life and their education, what should that person be thinking about doing as far as providing either for guardianship, medical supervision, schools, all that for those U.S. citizen kids, assuming especially the ones that are obviously under 18 or 21.
So it gets a little bit tricky, but there are a couple of things that we could think about. So the first thing that I would want to think about is maybe assigning a guardian first in my will, and then a guardian for the essential care of the child while they're still in the United States. So I can't, if I'm legally the parent, I could be in trouble if I'm deported and gone, but letting my child just stay with somebody who they're not really the legal guardian. And where it gets tricky is financial benefits. Under Ohio law and most states' law, I can name a temporary guardian for health care, but realistically, I would need to utilize the courts, and somebody would need to establish a guardianship via the courts to take over the financial management of the child. So that's the one thing. And that can be strange or difficult for some of our clients. But if the parent's gone and the child has a legal right to stay, and the child is with, say, a brother, sister, or grandparent, or, somebody that's really close to the child, like, say, an older brother or sister, then
Yeah.
that petition could be made by somebody other than the parent. And there's a great likelihood that they would gain guardianship over the child until they're 18. Now, of course, a will is helpful because a will can name a standby guardian, but that's only if you pass away. So if you're living, that doesn't really help. And then trusts. Trusts are helpful for the U.S. assets of the person that's here. So a trust, again, can nominate a trustee. A trust could be irrevocable, can't be changed, and somebody could be put in place with the authority to manage U.S. assets for that person that's here in the U.S. Now, it gets tricky, and tax considerations need to be had if there are both domestic and offshore assets. I think privacy favors oftentimes utilizing U.S. trust for assets wherever situated. But from a tax standpoint, an offshore trust for offshore assets keeps the assets offshore and outside of that U.S. beneficiary's taxable estate, and may even be helpful from an income tax standpoint in certain situations.
Yeah, and that's important. We see a lot of step parents and older siblings. And if the documentation is not in place when you get detained or you end up deported, it creates a lot of problems for them trying to navigate medical issues, and especially in school, because all the schools require, documentation now of that.
Right, very much so. And so some of it is taking that court process and utilizing it, unfortunately. Now, obviously, that could be a detriment if, for example, you have an older sibling or a relative that is the person that's petitioning to be guardian, but they have a criminal history or something in their past. So that's where trying to be proactive can and reactive can be a bad thing. So it's always helpful to really quiz the person that you're essentially leaving your child with, or naming in your will that the child would go with if something happens to you and you pass away. It's knowing thy person.
Yeah. So we talked about with businesses and with assets, we could maybe even work with you still if you got detained to get those things into the trust. But with family, with children and things like that, is that still doable if somebody's detained or even out of the country? Or is that something they really need to be thinking about before that happens to them?
I think they need to be thinking about it before it happens to them because they need to be thinking about for their will. God forbid they pass away in detainment or shortly thereafter going back, who the child will go with, and then maybe proactively. And this is not for everybody. I preface this, but some people may want to be so proactive that they initiate a minor guardianship proceeding now and essentially state like I'm a person who I my documented status I'm not sure my child was born here and I want this individual family member relative older sibling of theirs to be their legal guardian for various reasons. Now the downside to guardianship of course is that a court oversees it. Guardianship is a process that occurs in the probate court, but left with no options. Is that an option? Absolutely. Especially if the child is entitled to or may be receiving government benefits.
Yeah. And I'll note, for people listening and maybe even for you, in immigration, we have something called special immigrant juvenile status. So if you came to the United States and your child came with you and your child has no status, but you may be getting deported, there is a process if the foreign child is in the United States without proper guardianship that we can get a guardian appointed and that child may be eligible to become a green card holder and remain and stay in the United States. Last kind of thing I want to ask you about is
Sure.
if you do find yourself detained and if you do find yourself facing deportation and your assets, business, property, just your bank accounts, can you take that with you? How can you get that back to your home country if you want to? Can you liquidate those houses? How can you do all that if you're stuck in jail or if you're stuck overseas someplace?
So the first thing, of course, is if you've prepared and signed documents, an attorney, in fact, under a durable power of attorney, could liquidate accounts, sell properties, and send the money, overseas to the individual, set up a bank account overseas, of course, because a lot of that can be done by wire. For the person that has not done that and now they're stuck overseas, what happens is it becomes troublesome because a lot of these banks, they want you to come in person and sign things. So you're not left with no recourse. A lot of times you can do a delegation, and a lot of the financial institutions have their own documents that indicate that somebody can be named as a third party designee with no right to the property, but they have access and they can take action. So, to the extent your financial institution allows that, make sure that gets done. Again, the attorney, in fact, under a durable power of attorney, would have the ability to deal with real estate and sell real estate. So that could happen no matter where the owner ends up being. So I think that's crucial, and it's really a document that must be put in place immediately, just so someone has that authority. I think on a worst case scenario, a person who is stuck overseas, they got deported or what have you, and something happened, what they would do is sort of determine or locate or put somebody in place as their durable power of attorney from overseas. And it would be done this way. If it was Michael and Andy, who's my brother's name, was detained and shipped back overseas, and he was stuck in Poland because for whatever reason, the Sneeringers have Polish relatives there, and that's where he was sent. Well, if he was there, this is how I would attack the plan, at least. I know every attorney's different, but Andy would get in contact with me and tell me what he needs. Michael, I have real estate help. I need that transferred and sold, and the proceeds transferred to me. So I would draw up a durable power of attorney over here in the States, and then I would send that to Andy. Andy would go to the nearest US consulate or where have you and have his signature notarized, because again, we have those sorts of things there at those consulates or like the State Department office, what have you, whatever it's called.
Sure.
So that would get done there. And then with that, my brother Andy could send that back to me. Now I have a legal document giving me the power to do the things that Andy needs me to do: bank accounts, motor vehicles, business, real estate, etc. So that, I think, is my game plan. Now, where it gets tricky is, again, if there are certain financial institutions that require certain documents, I would get those and send them to Andy. So I think the problem, Rob, would be, of course, if, well, there's no embassy or consulate, what's the person to do? If you can't get to the nearest one, then I think that's where things are the trickiest. And honestly, I don't know that I have a viable solution other than telling the client, be proactive if you're here, but worst case scenario, know where the embassy consulate is, know who your person in the United States that you trust and can get things done is, because that person can send you the document to sign. You could sign it at one of these embassies or consulates and then get the document back to the person on shore to take action.
But I think that's important to be proactive, because as an immigration attorney, if I do find someone that gets detained or is facing deportation, I can usually have 60, 90 days notice before I know they're going to be on a plane in those worst case scenarios. So that's time to be proactive and to get those things done.
Right. Exactly. And 60 to 90 days is plenty of time to, let's say we have a handshake business, plenty of time to form the business. In Delaware, South Dakota, you can form an entity in an hour. That's plenty of time to do the estate planning documents. And I think what trips a lot of people up is costs. And so, like, yes, things have annual costs, like forming an entity, but and I won't share with you pricing because each family's different, but
Right.
we are willing to work with clients on budgets to get things done, because like that's the kind of people we are. It's helping others to get results in times of crisis. That's what a lawyer's supposed to do. It's not supposed to price people out so they can't get things accomplished and then they're stuck with a mess, because then the mess becomes our mess.
Well, and that's one of the really great things about our firm, I think, is just the focus on helping small businesses and working with entrepreneurs and working with companies and helping them build and protect themselves and moving forward. It's been a big benefit to me of joining the firm and helping our clients. So, Michael, anything else you think somebody in these dire circumstances should really be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what a couple of things culturally, just talking to your next of kin, your loved ones about burial, cremation, religious ceremony versus not. I think that's important to a lot of our listeners, especially those a little older than me. I think the older you are, the more opinions you have on those circumstances and situations. And I think lastly, Rob, what I'd love to touch on briefly is just liability, because as you mentioned, a lot of these handshake deals, it's I'm fronting and giving money to somebody to buy a vehicle or to get heavy duty machinery rented, and somebody signs off on that. Maybe that's our client, maybe that's somebody else. But reading the fine print, coming to somebody like Rob or myself to look at a basic document goes a long way, because you never know what you're going to sign, what that signed document's going to put you on the hook for, and then God forbid the big one happens.
Yeah.
I gave money to somebody to buy a car, they crashed it, and now the car's gone. Well, then there's the other scenario where somebody gave me money to like buy them a car. I give them the car, it's still in my name, and they crash the car. And everything I've worked for in my name is now gone and subject to creditors. So be careful what you're signing, be careful what you're guaranteeing as well.
Yeah, I think that's key because so many of our clients, they've come here, they've worked, they've built a life, they've got assets, they've got sometimes just a shoebox full of cash because they don't have proper banking access. If you're faced with ultimately getting deported from the United States, you don't want to let all that hard work go to waste. I mean,
Right.
many of our clients have sacrificed so much to come here and work and to build that nest egg, if you will. Uh, you've got to take the steps necessary to be able to take that back with you.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Michael, thank you very much. If somebody wants to, has other questions, we have the immigration at BMD LLC email. Send us an email. We can get you in touch with Michael for those specific issues with regard to your business, your home, your family. Really appreciate your time today, Michael.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking, and anybody, please reach out, and I'd be essentially happy to work with anybody, or at least talk with them and give them half hour to an hour of my time. Be a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yeah. It's key to know what options you do have. So, all right. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on episode 10 shortly in a week or so. All right. Bye.
Bye.